Hi, everyone. It's Amrita Tripathi, the host of Say Again. It's a podcast I kicked off last year to chat with incredible leaders and change makers about their areas of expertise and also a little bit about what makes them tick. Our episodes drop weekly on Tuesdays, and I know that's been working for some of you. I've probably skipped a couple of weeks this year, for which I apologize, but I wanted to say a huge thank you to the Say Again community, and I'd love for more of you to join us. There is a free monthly newsletter that I'm going to drop on the screen and in the show notes. Please do sign up for that. That has a best of, as well as other interesting recos for books, shows, things I've learned, conversations overheard, and much more of that. We will soon be featuring some of your voices, which I'm really excited about, as well as getting some goodies and swag and things like that together. So do join that community. Let's make the conversations count. And I'd love to hear more from more of you, wherever you are in the country or the world. Now, this episode I'm going to do as a solo episode, which, as you know, I've been doing at least once a month, if not more. I thought I would take the opportunity today to talk to you a little bit and maybe answer some questions I've been getting about how you go about writing. As you probably know, I started out as a journalist and I have written several books as well as co-authoring several books. So I've written novels like The Other Sister, which is my newest, latest baby. Please go out and buy it or order it for someone who likes fiction, who likes reading contemporary work. It would mean a lot to me if you do. And if you could let me know, you could also leave a review or a rating or spread the word, because trust me, in this day and age, every single author every single creator needs all the help they can get. So this is, of course, something I'd be happy to talk to you about, writing fiction. I've also conceptualized, edited, and co-authored the Mindscape series of books, which are non-fiction, and co-authored another book, which I'm going to talk about potentially for our next episode with my wonderful, illustrious co-author. Now, I do want to talk to you about writing because many of you do have these questions. First, we'll take a step back. Some of you want to know a little bit more about how you start. How do you start working on a blog? How do you start working on a book? Some of you have to think about your motivation for this. It could be that you have a story you want to share, and I think that's the best place to start. It could also be that you're looking at this in another way altogether, for which we'll have a separate episode. And that is when it comes to, establishing yourself as a thought leader. For some of the leadership development work we've done over at Tap In Tribe, a network for senior women professionals and allies, some of that work has entailed, talking to people about personal brand equity. How do you start that journey? How do you start, carving out your niche? Presuming you have the expertise, of course, how do you start communicating that better? And how do you sometimes use writing as a form of communication? So that could be through your blogs, through your newsletters, through your op-eds, etc. This is not the episode to find out more about that, but I will definitely follow up and do a separate deep dive on that if that's interesting to some of you. I wanted to talk to you today about the other kind of writing, which is when you feel you really have a story or stories to communicate. This could be in your native language. This could be in a language that's not your own, but which you think and communicate in. And, we could definitely talk about the nuances of that as well. I do think in this day and age, if you're an nascent writer, and this is not to pour, cold water on anyone's hopes and dreams, but if you do look at traditional publishers, and I'm speaking from the Indian context here, because that's what I know. If you do look at Indian publishers, they tend to nowadays really be looking at your footprint online as well. Not to say that fantastic, blazing, natural given, God-given talent will not find a home, or it won't find its readers, or it won't find its publishers. No, far be it from me to say that. But, this is the world we live in. So as I said earlier, every single writer or creator, needs all the help they can get to get the word out, precisely because there are so many of us now. It's a pretty cluttered environment. All of us are competing with each other for attention and eyeballs and, I suppose, revenue, especially when you're looking at selling something like a book, not just getting it for free on LibGen, which I will say, by the way, all the nonfiction is on LibGen. None of the fiction is on LibGen. So what does that say about supply and demand? You tell me. But jokes apart, let's take one step back and ask ourselves the first most important question, which is, why do I want to write? What is it I'm trying to say? What do I want to communicate? Is it a one-off? Is it a one story that I'm very, very passionate about? Is there something inside of me that I really, want to get out there in the world. And sometimes fiction starts like that, rarely as a fully formed thing, I find, but often through some sort of entry point. It could be a character, it could be a conversation, it could be an overheard snippet of dialogue that sparks something. If you don't, by the way, jot it down or write it down for yourself as a note, you'll probably forget it, you'll lose it. The muse will move on, trust me. And you will then one day find that someone had the exact same idea and it's gone on to be a huge bestseller, and you'll be kicking yourself. But yeah, what is your why? You can pause the video here while you think about it. You can take a notebook and pen. I still do that in a very old school. Let me hide my notes. In a very old school way, you can write that down, or you can jot it down, of course, on your phone or on your laptop. What is your why? Because that will kind of determine the rest of your journey, right? Sometimes you want to write just for the sake of writing and telling a good story. Sometimes that does not need to be published. Sometimes that can just be for yourself, or it can be for your friends and family. You will have to think about this a bit pragmatically and sort of practically, because there are so many things that then branch out from that one decision. Do you want to have your own website? Do you want to have your own blog? Do you think that social media or any of your existing social media profiles is enough to share this on? Do you want to already start a newsletter and start building a sort of subscription based audience for yourself? Do you want to then send this story to a few people for their critique, for their feedback, but also for them to share with other people? I'm talking about this one individual story, and so far I have not actually specified whether you want to share a story that's entirely made up or partially inspired by reality or entirely nonfiction. Again, very different routes to take. So let's come back to finding our why do we want to write in the first place? Sometimes we just want to scream into the void, as we all know, and there are great social media platforms to do that on. You could also do that on your own time. But sometimes we do want to share something because we just are compelled to, or we feel it adds something to the conversation, or it enlightens, it elucidates. It sort of is something that we just have to get out there. And I find my approach for the fiction and nonfiction to be very different. So again, I can speak to that. I'm speaking from experience. I have written 2 novels before this, countless rubbish drafts of different things. Well, not rubbish, I don't want to be mean to my imagination, but countless stories that perhaps didn't reach the level they had to be sent out into the world. I'm a big believer in writing and then editing and then putting it away for a while and then coming back to it. And of course, there are many other people who will help you on your journey. And that's something we can discuss at another time. You could have an editor, you could have a literary agent, you'd obviously have a team if you're going with a traditional publisher who picks up your work. If you're self-publishing, there's a whole different route I'm not entirely 100% familiar with, but I get the contours of, and I'm sure that's something that you can also explore. So we have decided that we're writing because there's a story we're compelled to tell. If it's a made up story, there's a different way of approaching it, which includes starting to plot what's going on, right? What is that story arc? What is happening character by character? What's happening conversation by conversation? If it's nonfiction, so in this case, when there's one book missing here, I apologize for that, The Age of Anxiety, which is a really popular one, co-authored with Kamna Chibber. This is Real Stories of Dealing with Depression, co-authored with Arpita Anand, which featured for the first time in India, actually, first-person stories of lived experience when it comes to depression. I think we had 9 or 10 stories there. It came out right before the pandemic. This is Young Mental Health, co-authored with Meera Aharan Alva, which we did a little bit differently. And it includes a sort of handbook or guide for parents, as well as several interviews on fascinating, people working in the mental health ecosystem, and interviews with young people. We decided to go with not minors, but college students and so on. And a lot of topics were covered under that umbrella of young mental health. And then the final book in this series was The Age of Anxiety, co-authored with Kamna Chibber, which was very, very important for us to address as well. The last 2 of the series came out, during the pandemic. Now, the way we approach these books are very different. And I dare say my training as a journalist helped there. My work with the Health Collective helped there, certainly fed, into all of the 3 books. But there I realized, look, there's an idea, there's a story I want to share with the world. I need to find the right, match of sort of expertise from the point of view of, whether it's lived experience or expertise. Like all of the 3 co-authors are trained. They're all trained clinical psychologists and mental health experts. And everyone we've spoken to has informed the book in a certain way. It would have been very different if I wanted to share a different story. In this case, what we were trying to do is kind of open out that conversation around mental health and enable access to some of these topics from an India lens or an Indian context, and in very simple, jargon free language as much as we could, in a very conversational way. So, the idea shaping these books that came to fruition thanks to Simon and Schuster India is very different from the way this book came together with Westland and Context and my editor there. So, coming back to you, you've paused the video at some point, you've decided what your why is, and maybe your why is just like, I just like the idea of being a writer, or I like the social cachet of being a writer, or I like the shine or the sheen of being a writer. There are probably going to be easier ways for you to get all of that without slogging through. And I think we can discuss some of that going forward as well. You can drop a comment, you can also share with a sense of humor. I definitely don't take myself too seriously. I think it is important though to question everything, question your own motivation, question your journey, and then just get started. So that's step number 2, actually. Once you figure out your why, it's going to help you decide, as I said, practically, are you going to go and block a .com or a .in or a domain with your name? Are you going to kick off maybe a newsletter? It could be a private one initially. It could be under a pseudonym. It could be under your own name, and just start testing the waters, start writing. It's one of those things that you get better at by doing. In fact, I did have a friend who said, look at that journey that me as a writer have been on between my first book and the third novel. And I have to agree, you get better by doing. You have to flex that muscle. You have to also, and things are a bit different here again for fiction and nonfiction, but you have to really carve out that space where you're not doing anything else for that period of time. And I've said this in some of the earlier writing videos as well, but I wanted to put it all together here for you, for listeners and viewers of the Say Again podcast. You really have to get into that zone. You have to get in the zone, whether you're working on fiction or nonfiction. With nonfiction, 100% keep track of all of your sources, attribute everything. The last thing you want, especially in an era where it's so easy to check, the last thing you want, and even if it was not so easy to check, let's be honest, you don't want an accusation of plagiarism. You don't want an accusation of like something that could have been attributed very easily by putting those quotation marks or saying as said by or according to or footnoting or endnoting. Attribute everything. Keep your notes meticulous. With the nonfiction, I also think it's perfectly helpful to take sort of help like you can use for attribution. We were in a pre-chat GPT era, and thank God for Elena, who helped us with the endnotes for a couple of books in the series. We definitely made the use of people who were trained as, in that sort of academic space, because I've completely lost track of the different schools of footnoting and endnoting and all kinds of rules. But now, as my friend was telling me, with ChatGPT is much easier, right? Somebody I know is using that to just make sure all of the citations are in the appropriate style. You still have to make notes. You still have to make sure you're attributing, but then you can bung it into one of these LLMs and sort of get the appropriate style. It could be the Chicago school. It could be the, other various schools. And just remember that it needs to be standardized, and you will want to double, triple check that, lock that in carefully. So nonfiction, relatively easy and straightforward. If you ask me, you're actually going to be making sure you can state the facts, back up whatever you need to back up, and put in quotes whatever you need to put in quotes, right? And again, I'm talking to those of you who are not writing for an academic audience, who are writing nonfiction for a general audience. And nonfiction, as you know, is doing really well in India, no matter what your niche it sounds like. So go for it. You might want to test these things out in advance. As I said, it could be with a blog, it could be with a small group, it could be with, I would say don't send out feelers yet to agents and publishers, but keep an eye on their catalogs and see kind of what are the trends. See if your work is fitting into any of these trends, like whether it's, history, or is it something to do with tech. Self-help books apparently are very big in India. So choose the field that you know the most about. And as you start building towards that, first get your expertise down on paper, know your stuff. And we're going to talk about some of the other stuff later, as in how do you project yourself as a leader in that space. That can come in a following episode. If you're interested, you can drop a comment. Our email will also be on the screen at some point, so you can send me a note. There will be a writing room or a writing class of some sort for small groups going forward. I think some of those will be the paid services we have via the Health Collective on that page. So you can take a look at that, and we can block off some time for that. Just keeping an eye on the duration of this, and just coming back to the other way of writing, which is when you want to write fiction, very different from the nonfiction. I would say still attribute, just keep an eye of, your source material, keep an eye of what you're reading. A lot of the work that you do in fiction, your research will form the bedrock, And then, of course, your imagination will take over. But, if it's something to do, so for example, we've talked a little bit about there being sort of themes here to do with social media, to do with mental health, to do with grief. And there are certainly sort of articles or books or work or stories or the work of the Health Collective that has formed the foundational layer of some of the work, for the other sister in this novel. And I think it's important to keep an eye on that, because you also want to know that you're not kind of reinventing the wheel. With fiction, of course, it's much harder to reinvent the wheel. But with fiction, you don't want to be super derivative either. I think one of the things when you're starting out with fiction is very natural and very normal that you will sound a lot like the people you're reading. And I think that's fine. Not everything you write needs to be published. Remember that. The people you're reading brings me to have an eclectic taste in books. I think it's great to read the kind of category you think you want to write in, but the more you read, the more varied you're reading. We were talking about language earlier, whether it's in your native language, whether it's in translation, whether it's in the language you think and work and communicate. Read as much as you can, and just start noticing things that authors are doing, because that will help you hone your craft. I think the final piece of advice for this little episode is just get started. It's very hard to do with a blank page or screen, but it's much easier when you start filling that up. So start with notes, start with questions to yourself, and I'll be happy to share some more with those of you as we go forward. But find out your why, find your entry point, think about what you're doing with this. Then you'll have to carve out time and make sure you're in the zone. I hope some of that has been helpful to you. Those of you who are aspiring writers, those of you who aren't, please go ahead and continue to be readers, consumers, and share with us your thoughts on some of the other expertise you'd like us to bring. Don't forget to leave a rating and a review for your favorite authors. I'd love for you to, of course, pick up my book if you could. Any of my books, actually. There are quite a few now. There's 7, so you have quite a few options. Nonfiction and fiction both. Leave a rating or a review. And don't forget to do the same for this very podcast. Thanks so much for listening to or watching Say Again. And I'll see you again next week with a guest. Much more coming up this whole season. See you soon.